All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. So again, good evening and thank you for coming to the JFCS Facebook Live Deep Dive into Mental Health. Mental health has always been a cornerstone of the services JFCS provides throughout the broader community. During the COVID-19 pandemic, JFCS continues to offer a variety of mental health services, along with a host of other resources and programs. Whether you or someone you know is struggling with depression, anxiety, isolation, if you're looking for advice on applying for public benefits, or if you're a healthcare provider in need of support, JFCS is here to help. Tonight, we will dive deeper into the impact the pandemic is having on mental health and offer strategies, techniques, and resources to help you navigate through these difficult times. Here with us today are the JFCS experts. We have Sarah Waxman, who is the Family Life Education Associate, and Christopher Scanlan, who's here from Education and Outreach Services. And we also have Deborah Borenstein, the Director of Donor and Event Operations. And I'm Eva Greenberg. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist with a private practice in Center City and the Main Line. And I will be initiating our conversation with our experts tonight, but I hope you will send in your questions so that Sarah and Chris can have a chance to answer them in the second half of our program. Okay, so let's go ahead. So for both of you, why do you think that the COVID-19 crisis provides or poses a specific threat to mental health?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, to start off, we've been thrust into it by no choice of our own. So we've gone from, what is normal life, quote unquote, into something which is really just uncharted territory. Now, when this typically happens to us, when we thrust into some kind of change like that, it's a big issue with, the unknown. Anxieties tend to pop up. But what I really wanted to start out talking about tonight was, focusing on things that we can control versus the things that we cannot control. Because when we focus on the things that we can control, we tend to be able to, thrive more in our own environments versus, focusing on things you cannot control. Well, you cannot control them. So, there's really no point in focusing on the things that you cannot control because it typically leads us into unhealthy, negative, emotions. So, real quick, things that we can control, right? So we can control our own behavior, right? And so, we can do things like wash our hands. We can, stay vigilant with our social distancing. We can keep up with our coping and our social connections as well. Things we can't control, certainly cannot control the behavior of others and what's going on right now. You see people not social distancing, there's nothing you can do about that. So, as well as, the behavior of people on the news, and you certainly can't control the virus itself. So, the point is to just bring it home to where you can control. And that, once again, is just the things within your reach and the things within your home.
Yeah, great. And I think I would just add a few things to that. First, the piece that Chris mentioned about the unknown. There's a lot of uncertainty that this situation brings up for everybody. And that's a very hard thing for people to tolerate. And often in the face of uncertainty, we tend as human beings to have a negativity bias that if we are looking for that control, right? So if something's uncertain, we tend to predict or plan for the negative thing that's going to happen. And that can add to our stress to be thinking that way. So that's definitely a piece, I think, that poses a mental health challenge during this pandemic. And when we talk about stress, I think there's just so many different stressors that are coming up and out of this situation. I think one of the things is that being isolated at home, the blending of all of our worlds and spaces presents like a real challenge. There's a very healthy function to having a place to go to work and a place to be at home with your family and to be able to separate things out. And now having them all blended together is really challenging. I also think with the social distancing piece, we as human beings are interdependent by nature. There is this American value on the idea of of being independent. We value that as a culture, but really as human beings, we need to be with other people to thrive. And so the social distancing is just really hard for us. I also think that cabin fever is a real thing. I really appreciate whenever I watch Governor Cuomo do any of his updates and he puts slides up. He had a great slide the other day about cabin fever and all the things that are happening in everyone's household as a result. And so that's very real. I think that our sense of safety and security has been upended as individuals and as a society, and that causes a lot of stress, as well as I think resource security within feeling safe is something that a lot of people are facing, and a lot of people for the first time might have been resource secure before, and now all of a sudden aren't in a lot of ways that totally came unexpectedly, and that's causing a lot of stress. I also think that concerned people feel for vulnerable populations, for essential workers, whether they're in your family or not, can create a lot of worry and concern that's hard for people. And I think all of these things together can also exacerbate any pre-existing mental health concerns people might have had before this all happened, can make that anxiety or that depression or other things you've been navigating with your mental health heightened. And I think the final piece that I'll add to this before we continue with some other questions is that I think where we are now with everything is that a lot of people are experiencing response fatigue, in the sense that we've come past the short-term initial phase of what it feels like to be navigating this pandemic, and we're now getting geared up for the long-term, more intense part. And people are feeling like it's even more challenging, that it's getting old. Can I open my isolation pod up a little bit, because it's getting even harder to keep doing what we've been doing to deal with this. So yeah, there's a lot that this pandemic is bringing up for our emotional well-being. Yeah.
I've actually heard that referred to as the third quarter situation, in times of captivity, when people kind of know that they're almost halfway through or halfway through, but not quite there. It leads to even more anxiety and more distress. I've seen that a lot too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you for all those answers. So to piggyback on that, given all of those things that are going on for all of us, what are some ways of thinking that might be helpful at this time?
Sure. Yeah. I'd like to introduce a topic called unconditional acceptance. Right. So there are 3 areas of unconditional acceptance that I think, I'll relate them to what's going on right now, because I feel like they would certainly be helpful now, as well as, in general life when, this is all over. And those 3 areas are the self. So you unconditionally accept yourself, you unconditionally accept others, and you unconditionally accept life. But what this doesn't mean is just to kind of just passively say, oh, well, things are bad right now, but I'm sure they'll be fine one day, right? Because that's not really accepting it. That's just kind of pushing it down and, just kind of pushing it to the side. So, I think we can start out with unconditional self-acceptance, is where you unconditionally accept yourself for both your positive qualities as well as the qualities which you feel like you need some improvement on. Now, how can we go about, practicing this topic is, I think, we're in a time right now where we're not so sure, right? So we're not really into the routine that we were in before. So we might be going about life in a different way. Certainly might not be accomplishing everything that we wanted to accomplish before. Now, where does self-acceptance come in with that? Well, if you are feeling a certain kind of way, you didn't get through your workout, or you woke up too late, or something like that, something to that nature. You might be a little angry at yourself. You might feel anxiety, because then you start thinking, well, if I didn't complete my workout today, then certainly I'm going to put on 10 pounds by the end of the week. If I do that, then I certainly am a no good person. But overall, you can start accepting yourself, and through some helpful coping statements, such as I certainly made a mistake, but I'm certainly not that mistake. I'm certainly more. There's certainly more to me than just that mistake, such as I'm a great this, I'm a great that. So we can work towards accepting ourselves and cutting ourselves a little bit of break, while realizing that it's not the end of the world. If you do make the mistake, totally fine, but you can learn from it in the long run. A second area, talking about unconditional other acceptance, which I feel is pertinent right now, because we are, as Sarah was saying before, we're kind of stuck in many situations with one another. And so I was thinking about it before, and it can almost relate it to like a pressure cooker of like social interaction. So things are they're more intense at the moment. And so when that happens, we can certainly see where conflict might come into play. So you might not like the fact that your husband, your wife, your spouse, your partner, they were loud last night when you were trying to sleep and you were trying to get up early for work. Typically that's a problem anyway, but now this might be heightened. You might not like the fact that when you're on a Zoom call that your children come running through or something like that. But so once again, right, we look at the whole person as itself. We don't magnify the mistake, I guess, as it were. And we can say something like, this person did this, I don't like what they did, but I can certainly accept them because they are more than the mistake that they just made. For instance, they're a loving husband, they're a loving wife, beautiful kids, what have you. So once again, we want to unconditionally accept them, despite the fact that they may have made a mistake that you don't like. Third area I want to talk about is unconditional life acceptance. Now, this is a big one, right? Because, unconditionally accept what's going on in the world. Well, that's a heck of a feat to talk about. We're going through something that is, it's bad, right? And certainly, a lot of unpleasant things are happening at the moment, sure. But once again, unconditionally accepting is it's easier said than done. But at the end of the day, right? So you can maybe tell yourself something like, well, I certainly don't like what's happening right now, but I don't, I can be happy in spite of it. Maybe you don't like the fact that you're stuck indoors, most of the week, most of the month right now, but you can certainly be happy in spite of it. You can, maybe pick up something new. You can, talk to an old friend. You can, you can concentrate on your coping, stuff like that. Just telling yourself that, it's bad, but it's certainly not awful. Mm-hmm. That you can, once again, areas of control, you can bring it back into the ring and start focusing on what you can or cannot control. Another little thing that I wanted to discuss was this idea of dialectics, where we have two truths about the same topic real quick. So we have our emotion mind, and then we have our wise mind, or yes, our emotion and reason mind, right? So we want to honor the fact that we feel a certain way, right? I'm certainly angry right now, right? But the other end of that is that, maybe I should go take a break from what I'm doing right now so that I can come back to it and maybe apply some of those coping statements, or I can settle a dispute or what have you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It sounds like you're talking about kind of the and statement. I can feel this and also feel this, or I can
absolutely
and also have this. It doesn't need to be mutually exclusive, which kind of just opens up possibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just honoring the two truths of how you're feeling.
I like that a lot. So grief has been a big buzzword in the mental health community. So I was hoping that you guys would be able to talk a little bit about the ways that people are currently experiencing grief. You know, oftentimes it's just associated with a death, and certainly that is happening these days. And are there also other ways that we are, as a society, experiencing grief?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, Eva, I've been thinking about a lot and talking about with clients a lot about, how is what we're all experiencing on both an individual and a collective level grief. And there was actually a great article that came out in the Harvard Business Review in March, like around March 23rd, I want to say, that I believe Deb is going to post the link to that in the Facebook comments thread. So if anybody wants to read that, it's an excellent article. And the title of it is That Discomfort You're Feeling is Grief. And it's an interview with David Kessler, who is a leading expert around the world on the idea of grief. And he talks a lot in the article about how, like what you were saying, Eva, we tend to think of grief as related to loss of life or when you're dealing with somebody who has an illness, but that we're dealing with so many different types of grief right now too, around other losses, the loss of certainty, like we were talking about, the loss of what our life looked like before, the loss of our ability to plan, the loss of our ability with that uncertainty to really know what things are going to be in the future. There's a lot of also anticipatory grief around the knowledge that on the other side of this, things are going to change and be different. And we don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet, but we know that it's going to be different. And so there's this loss. And it can be, really hard to navigate. But I think understanding it and understanding what you're feeling as grief is helpful in being able to cope with it. So Deb, I'm going to have you pull up the slide for this part as well. But I think it's helpful for people to understand that there are different stages of grief that we all go through. And this was developed by a psychiatrist named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about what she initially put together as the 5 stages of grief that you can see here on this screen. So when somebody is going through a grieving process, there's different waves of emotion that they might feel. So something that you might experience could first be denial. So related to this pandemic, it could be like, this virus isn't going to affect me. I don't have to worry about it. That could be something that people were thinking in the beginning of this. There is a piece of anger, right? I know for myself, I tend to experience waves of anger in my own household, at myself, at my husband, at my kids, for things that really aren't warranted for that anger, but it's an emotion that's coming up for me because I'm feeling a wave of grief about the loss of what our life has been like. Or I'm angry because I can't go and just get a haircut already. I'm feeling some version of grief in that anger. There's also the sadness. There's also that comes up, the depression piece, where you might be feeling just really sad about what's happening, sad about the state of the world, sad about the loss of life, sad about just this is a really hard situation and just feeling really down about it. There's also a phase that was identified, that's the bargaining phase, where you might start having thoughts where, well, if we can just make it 2 more weeks, then we'll be on the other side of this, right? Then we can start doing things differently. Then this will almost be over. I can just make it 2 more weeks. I can make it 1 more month, the bargaining phase. And then there's also acceptance, where you get to a place where you just kind of acknowledge, like, this is happening or this has happened, and I can accept what Chris was talking about before, what I can and cannot control, and kind of focus on how to move forward with what you can control. But I think another important piece in naming all of this is that these stages of grief are not linear. And that's what I love about this diagram that we have here, that you can see that all of these waves of emotion, these stages of grief, are all interconnected with each other. And you may reach a point of acceptance and then 3 days later be back in anger, or be back in being really sad, or some version of denial, and then come back to acceptance. And that it's very much a non-linear process that you feel as you're grieving. Okay, and yeah, Deb, we can take the slide away now. That's what I wanted to say about that. So.
Yeah. No, that's really helpful. And I guess, maybe you could touch on this also, that there might be different coping strategies depending on which stage you are at.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, talking about the coping stages, before I name the first one, I would just say, I think it's also really helpful to frame it for yourself that all of these stages are part of a natural process towards healing, that it's your body and mind and your heart's way of actually healing to feel all of these emotions and move through them, because grief affects us physically, it affects us mentally, it affects us emotionally, and this is your body and your mind and your heart's way of getting to a place of healing. So the first thing I would say in terms of coping is that you want to make a time to grieve, to just feel those emotions, to try not to repress them, but to just move through the emotion, because there is eventually going to be another side to it. What comes up must come down. And so allowing yourself to feel the emotions is going to be important. And I think keeping this frame in mind, if you're able to kind of name for yourself, identify whatever emotion you're feeling, and then say, oh, hey, and this is part of grief, it will help you move through that feeling faster and get to another place. Definitely reach out for help. Reach out to friends and family and just talk about what you're feeling is also really important. And another piece I might recommend too is trying to stay grounded. I think that we can sometimes get very overwhelmed by these emotions. You might get overwhelmed by sadness, overwhelmed by the anger, and kind of start to feel like you're not very present. And so a simple exercise that you can try to bring yourself back to the present space and to bring down the heightened state of that emotion is to light up your senses and to look around the room and go through a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. So name 5 things for yourself that you can see, 4 things for yourself that you can hear, 3 things for yourself that you can touch or feel, 2 things for yourself that you can smell, 1 thing for yourself that you might be able to taste, and that can bring you back into a more present moment. And it also doesn't matter what number you assign to what sense. You can do 5 things, you can smell, whatever works for you. It's just to bring you back to that grounded moment. You might want to also focus on someone outside of yourself. That often, if you're feeling really badly, but you can find a way to help somebody else, that can help you also feel a little bit better. And I know we're in a situation where it's really hard to often change your space, but as much as you can change your environment to help change your mood, that may help as well. So even if it's just going to a different room in your house, or taking a quick walk around the block, or doing something to kind of change your environment, that might also help shift your mood in some way. As well as if there's a way to exercise self-compassion. And without going into too much detail about that too, we have a Click for JFCS page that has a lot of different meditations and ways that you can take care of yourself. And there's some self-compassion exercises there too that you could take yourself through to find a way to be gentle with yourself. And so, yeah.
So I guess that also segues into the next one too. Self-care is another big buzzword, right? We see it all over Instagram, all over Facebook, do this for self-care. What are some mentally healthfully ways to take care of ourselves these days? And I guess that can mean different things for different people, but what would you recommend?
Sure. I mean, at the moment, once again, we've been thrust into this time, this change where everything is different, and a lot of people are cut off from their self-care routines. Gyms are closed, yoga studios are closed, art studios are closed, what have you. Social gatherings of any kind are are canceled. So I think first off, start thinking about some alternative ways that you can get that self-care and get that that stress relief out, or that social connection. And if you are someone who does go to the gym, there's online subscriptions for, there's free videos for exercise that you can take in. There's home equipment that you can buy. Social gatherings, you can, you're certainly, I've been Zooming with friends and family, this entire time. It's certainly helped me to maintain a connection in a sense of, quote unquote, ideal normalcy throughout this entire time. There's also a resource that I would like to bring up, which is, it's a DBT list, Marshall Linehan's list of pleasurable and activities and distractions. So obviously we can't do a lot of these, but there's certain good number that we can, such as, gardening is on there, having a cup of coffee, exercising, reading a book, engaging, like Sarah was talking about the senses, you can engage yourself in, like a nice, like a treat or something, a bit of cake or a cookie or something, what have you, anything that, restores, some sense of self-care and stress relief is always something that's going to go a long way in getting you through this, for sure. But we also talked, a little bit about mindfulness. There's certain mindful activities that you can do, the classic ones. We have, you have yoga, you have Tai Chi, meditation. But what you can also do is you can make something mindful. So for instance, even, like doing the dishes, is something that I'm fond of. And Sarah talked about engaging the senses while you're doing that. So you can make it mindful by just taking your time, right? Engage your senses and focus on one thing at a time. So that's, that's one thing. Another thing that is certainly helpful at this time. Another important thing, maintain a schedule. Yeah. Once again, the maintaining of the schedule, right? It brings us back to our areas of control, right? So we certainly can't control the fact that we're not at work anymore. We don't have a commute. That's done with for now, right? So what we can do is we can try to plan a schedule, at least a loose schedule now, right? So we're in this environment where things aren't what they usually are, and you might find that you do plan the schedule and you don't really adhere to it 100%. So this is once again where our unconditional self-acceptance comes in, like I was talking about before, right? I didn't, I didn't help my kid as much with their homework as I would have liked to today, right? Certainly not a horrible parent. I was busy, caught up with a million meetings on Zoom today, right? Perhaps I can help them later or give them extra help tomorrow, or I can make it up to them somehow. So certainly cutting yourself a break and just relaxing while understanding that, you are a person and you're certainly capable of making mistakes, and that's just part of human nature. Let's see, what else do we got here? Practice unconditional acceptance. Okay, and that's what I have.
Yeah. I think you covered a lot of great things, Chris. And I would just add, if this could be easier for some people than others, depending on how much flexible time you have, but even exploring new interests or pushing into old hobbies you hadn't had time for can be really helpful as well in terms of your self-care. I know for me, I feel like I'm rediscovering music, like being able to listen to songs that I like that aren't, Sesame Street with my toddler. For me, when I can, just like lifts my mood. And I love to sing. So just like finding ways to sing, and push back into that hobby and like love for me. So finding ways to do that for your self-care.
Yeah, those are all really, really great ideas. And you started to talk about this a little bit, within the self-care, and also, giving yourselves and each other and your family a little bit of grace. But can you talk more about how families specifically can support each other during this time? I have a lot of patients who are, having a hard time being at home with their family, and really want to know ways that they can be there for for the others, and also maybe talk to the other people in their families about ways to be there for them.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Sure. Yeah. Once again, schedule with the flexibility. Cut yourself a break. I think maybe even cut the people in your family a break too. Perhaps once again, talking about the kids, if the kids don't complete their homework or they're having difficulty with a subject while you're engaged, and perhaps your partner's engaged, no one can help the child, then perhaps the child is understandable why they're becoming frustrated at the moment. And the more that you regulate yourself, kids are kind of like sponges, so the more that you regulate yourself, the more that they will pick that up as well. And on top of that, probably accepting the fact that you have to do this right now. Like you don't have to do it. Let me rephrase, right? It's more helpful to do the schedule, right? But it's certainly a challenge to do that at the same time, and honoring and accepting the fact that it is a challenge. But if you can get at least some of it done, then that is certainly a win.
Adjusting expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's certainly okay if you don't get 100% done. It's certainly okay if you don't get, if you get 0% done because the day was just wild. So aiming, to have it done is certainly a long way to go. Distance. I think Sarah might have covered this somewhat, but finding time to be alone. I think exploring the space and using the space within your home. My wife and I do my work in the bedroom, she does hers in the living room, so that way later we can meet up, and and it almost feels like a normal day after that, because we do our jobs, and then we get to have dinner. Sometimes we have lunch together. It's kind of nice that way. I think headphones have been really good too. Like if somebody wants to watch a movie on the TV, the other one wants to listen to music or read a book, just different ways where you can find the space that you need, and practicing that healthy distance as well. But that also brings me to the boundaries, right? So don't be afraid to tell the people in your life that you could use a break, and that it's certainly helpful to phrase it in certain ways. There's a certain way, a skill set known as Dear Man, that I like to impart to clients. So we describe what's happening, right? It's like, oh my, what's happening to us using facts, right? So like, I was very busy today. I'm very stressed out, and then, so that's the D, right? We're going to describe. Okay, and then comes E. We're going to express how we feel using I statements, right? So we say things like, I would be happier if I could have some space, at the end of the night, right? So we want to avoid any kind of you need to stay away from me because I'm stressed out right now, because God knows that's gonna, exacerbate things, right? So we got D, E, A, we're gonna assert, right? Assert. So what I would like from you is maybe like an hour or half an hour to myself, right? And then at the end, we're going to reinforce. Okay, so we're going to say something like, and I think it would be beneficial for the both of us if I were able to go and have that time to myself to kind of decompress and de-stress. At the end of that, we have, we had the dear, now we have man, mindfulness, right? So we talked before about having that time to yourself, right? To where, you can practice the mindfulness, right? let's see, certain ways that we talked about before, the traditional versus the non-traditional, yoga, meditation versus just having some time to yourself, right? And then being assertive, right? So, once again, practicing the assertiveness, and at the end, you're going to negotiate, right? So you're also going to want to remain open to what the people in your life have to say about what you're talking to. Now, that also brings us to time together. Always a great thing, right? With the people who you're living with, maybe planning some activities, board games, video games, movies, stuff like that, anything really. Emotional health. We want to focus on the emotional health. We talked a lot about coping skills that we can use, right? But, I also wanted to go over some stuff that, you can lay out for the kids, right? So we're adults, adults and adolescents, we're pretty good with the ways that we know how to cope. And then with the little ones, if you notice that they're frustrated, do you need a break, right? Because that certainly trains them to ask for the break, because it's always feel good for them to have the break, because they don't really know how to vouch for themselves just yet. And then offering them things that are stress relieving as well. Coloring works really well. So maybe having some coloring time, some Play-Doh, time with their toys, but yeah, I would also avoid the video games and the electronics as well. And I think that was it. And once again, unconditional acceptance.
Yeah, important. That's very important. Okay, can we switch gears a little bit and maybe talk a little bit about trauma and resiliency, and what that means, given this time?
Yeah, and I think I'll answer that and be brief about it, because I know we are closer. We've hit our half-hour mark, and we want to leave some time for questions as well that Deb might be getting. But I'll just briefly say, I think that definitely what we're all experiencing on an individual and collective level is a form of trauma. You can think of trauma as a deeply distressing experience to the mind or body, or you can even just boil it down really briefly to the idea of it's too much, too fast, and it overloads the system, your physical system, your emotional system, your thinking system. And so, I think that's definitely something we're all experiencing in a lot of the ways that we just outlined as well. But I think there's a lot of stigma also around the idea of trauma, and that a lot of people tend to think that if you experience a trauma, it directly equals a very negative outcome. And that is not always the case, that there are a lot of protective factors that can be in place that can decrease the impact and the duration and the longevity and the frequency and the intensity of the impact of the trauma, that if that's in place, sets you up for more healing, quicker healing, and not as many detrimental negative effects. And so I think already a lot of what we've already talked about is can increase your resiliency. A lot of that self-care and the coping strategies to take care of your emotional self really increases that resiliency in the face of trauma. And I will also say that in this series of Facebook Live events, I believe on June 8th, our director of Holocaust Services at JFCS, Carly Brusky, is going to be doing a whole Facebook Live program on trauma and resiliency. So if this piques your interest, tune in then to that to hear more.
Okay, so I guess we can turn it over to Deb to see if there are any questions.
All right.
We've actually got two, but we'll say that we're sort of ending our time, but I'm sure we can answer them succinctly.
Okay.
The first one is, how can I help my family who I'm sheltered with understand my feelings of grief and explain to them that they're normal feelings of grief?
Mm-hmm. I think right now, what I was talking about before, Dear Man would certainly, help with that, to impart how you're feeling and what you would like from your family. If you're, once again, you can actually just Google Dear Man, and that will come up with the acronym and, how to apply that as well. And also, normalizing it as well, so would certainly help, your family to understand that, this is certainly normal part of life is grief.
Mhm. And I'm not sure if there are different ways that your family members might connect different ideas, but if you want to show them like an infographic like we put out there, or put them to an article, or just name, what grief is and what you're feeling within it, that might help as well. Yeah.
That's great. I will say that I have one more question, but before I say it, we've gotten a lot of thank yous on the feed that people are tuned in and they're watching and they're very grateful for the knowledge that we're sharing this evening. So that's
Awesome.
really fantastic.
You're all very welcome.
The final question that I have is, I'm trying to stay positive, but when I'm talking to my friends, many of them seem negative. Camp is being canceled. School is now not going to happen. This pandemic is never going to end. How do I deal with my friends who are negative all the time?
So one thing I'll say to that is the first thing that popped into my mind is boundaries. And I mean boundaries for you. So if you need to keep a little bit of distance and not talk to the friends of yours right now as often that are just in more of a negative place, not in a judgmental way, but just in realizing it's affecting you in a way that's not working for you right now, it would be okay to kind of say to yourself, I'm going to take a break from interacting as much with them. Just like I know a lot of people are taking big breaks from social media right now, that it's a little too overwhelming, and they've just said, okay, I'm deleting Facebook from my phone, or I'm only going to look at it once a week or once a day. Whatever boundaries would feel appropriate for you would be okay.
And here I go again, right? Unconditional acceptance, right? So
Yeah.
you can remind yourself over and over and over again, right? Until it's part of you, that I certainly don't like the negativity, but I do love them as people. And that might help you to accept their behavior right now. And also, try to understand where they're coming from. That goes a long way too, to really just sit back and think about them as people and why they might be reacting the way they are.
I know for me personally, I've had to ask people to only send me happy memes. I only want to hear happy news. I don't want to be on forwards, about certain negative aspects of the pandemic, because I don't need anything, extra.
Yeah, I'm glad that you said that, Deb, too, that like boundaries can apply also to like your self-care, and like if you need to limit how much news you take in, and that laughter, any way that you can find a way to laugh, is going to help. I really needed that earlier this week, and my friend sent me like a funny meme, and I had to put my 1-year-old down because I was laughing so hard. And I realized I just really needed to laugh today. It'd been a while and it felt good.
That's great. That's all the questions that we received on the feed. Just a lot of thank yous, and people are grateful for the conversation. So I just want to share real quick the care information. So if anybody needs to reach out, let me just do this real quick. Here we go. This is the contact information for Jewish Family and Children's Service. There's our care navigation line, and we currently have extended hours on the line, or you can just reach out to our website 24/7, of course, with all the different things that we have offer in terms of COVID response.
Yeah, I would like to mention, my program, Early Intervention, I do one-on-one counseling with kids, Philadelphia high school students. So any Philadelphia high school students, I'm certainly open to taking referrals.
Wonderful. That's it. So I want to thank everybody for being a part of the call tonight. Eva, you were fantastic.
Thank you, Eva.
And thank you, Sarah and Chris, for lending your expertise to this very important conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Thanks.
glad to be here.